Good afternoon, everyone. When these events are scheduled on Sunday during brunch hours, I always have to give an extra thank you to those who come out during brunch to hang with us. Thank you to Moad for the invitation, Elizabeth and Nia for organizing this beautiful event and weekend. And thank you, Antwaun, for spending an extra day here to a little bit more information about the new Black Vanguard. Antwaun and I have been trying to be in conversation and meet in person for 5 or so years now, and this is our first time meeting in person, so it's really an honor to share the stage with you today, so thank you.
Thank you, Rikki.
So Moad is, as Elizabeth mentioned, the second to last stop on the new Black Vanguard tour, which has been going on for 5 years. So how do you feel? How does it feel? What's this experience been like?
I think that when we planned the new Black Vanguard, we really just wanted to sort of do one show, and create, really where the focus was on the book as a document, as a naming document for sort of the moment that was happening. And so not to forget it. And then we had an opportunity to do a very sort of a show at Aperture when Aperture had the gallery. And then from there, Aperture just kept saying that different institutions wanted to show the work, which was really exciting, and it just kept going, And then at some point, I sort of made the decision that that the show should stop, not because we ran out of places, but more so because I think that group shows are, very important, and especially shows like this that sort of mark a moment. But I also think that there's a lot of work that needs to be sort of done thinking about these artists as individual artists, right? And thinking about sort of their concerns in a more in-depth way, and thinking about other artists even beyond these artists, right? Who are also working alongside them, who are a part of the community, who are rethinking sort of contemporary portraiture. And so I feel really sort of grateful for the opportunity to have, traveled the show, literally across the world.
Yeah.
And I said the one thing that I would like for it to happen is at some point some iteration of this exhibition to happen on the African continent. It's been sort of on every other continent but Africa, and so I think that I feel super grateful, but also it's been really amazing to be in conversations with different sort of communities. There's the show into Australia, and went to the Middle East, Doha, Qatar, traveled across Europe and traveled across America, and it was just really sort of exciting to see sort of the local sort of photographic communities, or the local Black communities, or even communities outside of the diaspora react to the work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what's beautiful too, even in your mention of the continent, right, that you engage so many African photographers in this project, which is a really kind of beautiful goal that you had here. It stages a really incredible conversation, not only about the diaspora, but also about kind of digital media. You spoke a little bit yesterday about how when you first started on this project, you had already been engaging with so many photographers. Instagram. And so when it came to trying to figure out who was going to be in the book and how you were going to narrow it down, it was a lot of honestly engaging through social media in that way, which I think is really incredible, but also speaks to kind of the contemporary moment too, of how Black folks have been able to make images of themselves, share images of themselves, but also develop community online in addition to all of these places that the exhibition has traveled.
Yeah, part of the planning of the exhibition really is sort of a reflection of where and how we experience these images, right? And sort of how communities come together. And in this sort of main section of exhibition, you have 15 artists from across the African diaspora that some knew each other, some didn't, some had, sort of digital relationships. They all know each other now because of the book and the exhibition and traveling, and them all sort of doing their parts, around the world. but yeah, no, I think that like for me, the reason, like traditionally you don't sort of go online to sort of find artists or whatever, but it's something that has sort of happened, with the advent of social media and particularly, places like Tumblr and Twitter and Instagram. And, that is the way that we encounter images now, right? For good or worse. And I wanted that reflected in this project because it almost felt like you had to sort of have that conversation. And so there's a section of text that I wrote for this that talk particularly about sort of how these artists are making their own communities. And it's not just sort of digitally, like it was also sort of they created their own zines, created their own books, created, and really sort of there's a sort of deeply rooted print culture that they also sort of engage in that sort of go back to, Ebony and Jet, but also the Black Photographers Annual and, the history of photographers making books and, self-publishing and things like that. I wanted to make sure that there was a full understanding of how images travel and how images are encountered, because the way that we encounter an image online is very different than the way we encounter an image in a magazine, versus encountering an image in a museum versus on a billboard or TV. So I wanted to complicate the ways in which we were thinking, sort of slow down the ways in which we think about images and how they sort of hit us, and doing that involves social media.
Yeah, so in addition to these, that's a perfect segue to my next question for you in how we encounter images. I'm also thinking of the home as a lot of folks' first experiences of encountering images. So don't hate me, I want to read a quote from an interview you did in 2021. It was an interview you did with BuzzFeed, and you said, quote, "We created our own museums through photography in our homes. Our grandparents and our mothers created photo albums and put images in these fake gold frames, and they lined them along the walls. And that was a way to show that we had worth, that we had a history, to show that we were beautiful. It was a way to counteract the white racism that people had experienced," end quote. And you dedicate the new Black Vanguard to Mama Chu, to Rainy Green, the area you grew up in Chicago. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about your early encounters with images, perhaps in your home or in your community in Chicago, that kind of shaped or maybe presented some type of full circle moment for you when you started working on this project.
Oh, wow, that's a great question I haven't encountered in 5 years. To answer your question, my mother was like an avid photographer, like family photographer. Like I just grew up with boxes and boxes and boxes of images that she would take and put in the garage because she just like run out of places to take these images. And so I had an understanding of like presentation and in the sort of black sort of the black sense, being dressed by your mother or family to look like your siblings and wearing the same things and all of that stuff, and so definitely sort of a long history and engagement with photography in a personal way, sort of in a vernacular way, but that's our story. Like I think about pivoting from my own sort of, but I think about sort of having a conversation with Stephen Tayo, right, one of the artists from Nigeria, and he, we were talking. I go, well, why did you start taking photos? And he goes, well, because there's no photos of me from like when I was a kid. And so what he did was he started actually taking photos of children in Legos to make sure that like they had these reflections of themselves, and he would take these photos and he would give them to them, right? Which is not sort of different than sort of like what sort of great street photographers, Black street photographers have done in Harlem or Baltimore or Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or, you name it, so, just, everybody from, Teenie Harris and Pittsburgh, to, just the local sort of nameless, sort of photographer that, you went to, in the community. And so that I think that was really important. And then there's this book by Elizabeth Alexander called The Black Interior. And in the first sort of 11 pages, she sort of makes the case for sort of the living room, right, as a public-private space, as, how it operates differently sort of in a Black home. And then you have, people like, Bell Hooks, who wrote rather convincingly about sort of encountering images in the American South, and how that sort of, there was a sort of what she called the oppositional gaze that sort of existed in those images, right? And so it was a gaze that sat outside of the sort of standards of beauty and desire and, longing that often met, the Black body through sort of a more mainstream sort of photographer or white photographer. And so, I think that those images, as they sort of are, in one's home, really allows for, in these would have said gilded if I had an opportunity instead of fake. And these gilded frames really sort of allows for a framing of history, a framing of personal history, a framing of, personal beauty, in a way that I think is very powerful. Dina Lawson, does this on the cover of what was that magazine? Garage magazine, with Rihanna, right? And so you have Rihanna sort of reclining in sort of this sort of Venus-like pose, and then behind her on the shelf is this sort of image of her at like age 11 that Dina had printed out and put it into sort of one of these frames that you might encounter, in your grandmother's living room. And so like that history of the vernacular photography has been extraordinarily important to the way in which Black people see themselves, going back, to the 1920s with the Brownie Kodak camera, right? Which basically allowed for Black people for the first time to take their images in their own hand and create their own representations and portraits that was different than, the sort of cartoonish images that had circulated.
And speaking of these Black folks being able to create their own images, both vernacular photography, editorial photography, one of my favorite elements, I love archives. It's like the historian scholar in me just loves kind of just circling through them and seeing what existed before. So one of my favorite elements of the presentation of the New Black Vanguard is the inclusion of the Ebony and Jet magazines, which, were also created in your hometown, Chicago. And so I just wonder, you have people like Monita Sleet Jr., who's taking famous photographs of not only civil rights folks like Martin Luther King Jr., but also taking incredible beauty photographs and fashion photographs as well. And so I just wonder if you could speak a little bit about your decision to include those archival elements within the exhibition. And then here at the presentation at MOAD, you have the Ebony and Jets on this floor. And then when you go upstairs, you see the Vogue and you see the more contemporary images on fashion publications.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because, Sleet Jr., who basically was, if there's a comparison, is sort of like Richard Avedon for Black people, and did all of sort of the major stories for Ebony and Jet, for a long time, and was in people's homes and doing the fashion and doing, doing sort of all those things. And then he wins the, like 1980s, I think he won the the Pulitzer Prize for photography. I think for photography, becoming the first Black photographer to do so, and it's largely a history we don't know much about, right? And I think I do love the archive, but I also think that our stories sometimes get stuck in the archive, and it's really difficult to, meaning that like whoever controls these archives tend to sort of not allow a public sort of interaction with them, right? And so, like, you have to be an academic, you have to be a curator, you have to, these are barriers to, educational barriers to entry, right? And so I loved when Theaster he created the Black Image Corporation, and he printed these images or reprinted these images from Ebony and Jet, and he put them, sort of in a box, and you could, sort of buy it. But then he also made an exhibition where you can go and put on gloves, and you can sort of go through the archive, right? So you can have, form a connection to the archive. But yeah, no, I think that it's just extraordinary. It was a really sort of short answer. It's extraordinarily important that. When you sort of think about sort of this idea, the title of the book is The New Black Vanguard, which implies that there is something that came before it, right? And so I wanted to make sure that folks, when audiences encountered the exhibition, that they understood that this wasn't sort of it's almost like with Black people, whenever we do something, they always erase our history, to sort of make you feel like you're singular or special or whatever. It's a trap that we should not fall into. There was a extraordinarily group of gifted photographers that sort of had gotten us to this moment that sort of emerged over the 20th century, right? And I wanted to make sure that, from Van der Zee to, Sleet Jr. to, even more contemporary people who might, like Mickalene or Carrie Mae Weems or Renee Cox or, you go on, Anthony Barboza, Kamunga, there's a history, it's a deep history that what I had hoped was that if we sort of think about these image makers today who are working on the cover of Vogue and all these places, then there is an opportunity for us to think about the ones that came before them. And so that was why it was super important, but also because, like Ebony and Jet and, the Black Photographers Annual and the shows that Kamange did in, late 60s and 70s. And, those were sort of, those happened in a moment that was extraordinarily different than now. And I wanted to sort of make sure that we were appreciative of of what had come before, in a way that it wasn't sentimental, but in a way that sort of was like, artists were making choices, right? This is not sort of a new thing for Black people, particularly with the use of photography. I mean, for the book, we sort of start with Frederick Douglass, right? And in 1861 to 1864, instead of writing speeches about the Civil War that was happening in America, he's writing essays and giving speeches about pictures in progress and how he becomes a photography critic basically, and then he would style himself for these photographs, right? And then he becomes the most photographed person of the 19th century on purpose, and so I think that it's important for us to grapple with that history, and it's also important for us to when photography sort of in the art world is sort of the least valued thing, it has played a real sort of role in sort of the construction of notions of beauty and identity for Black people. And so it was important for me to sort of to try to sort of at least give a little of that in the exhibition,
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I wonder if you can say more too about photography being the least valued. It's something that I've in following your work, knowing that photography is a passion of yours because of that, because of the valuation of painting and sculpture, etc. And in seeing the show at Saatchi Gallery in London and now here at Moad, and reading the book, thinking of the ways in which fashion and figuration, fashion and the Black body is pursued across a variety of mediums by a variety of artists who are exploring visual art, from sculpture to film and video to painting. What in particular is it about photography that was intriguing for you and remains intriguing for you, but also just speaking more to what it means that it's least valued, and in what markets and in what ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the art, in my other job, at the gallery, photography has long been, there's been a long debate about whether it's art, whether it's not art, and then also, sort of capital A art, painting, sculpture, those traditional sort of ways in which we sort of measure artistic value continue to dominate the market, with painting, sort of in the last, has really sort of, particularly in the sort of for Black people, has sort of dominates the market. And then you have photography where you don't necessarily, there's no real resale value, around most photographers. There are there's the Avedon, there's, some of the other, frankly, white men, maybe Cindy Sherman, I would think you can sort of group into that. Right, but yeah, I mean, they're mostly, the photographs are, in some ways, if you're not building sort of this market around them, the resale value of them are not as high as painting or whatever, so and so that leads to the art world to sort of undervalue the work of these artists and not want to show them and not want to and then it has also led to because artists are competitive and they're in the world, like we're all in the world, a preponderance of painting in the art world by Black artists who would have otherwise done other things, right? Which I don't think we don't talk about very much, because like we try to sort of think about art as like this a spiritual calling, and I'm not saying it's not, but I also it is also a business, and it's also and people want to succeed, and people want to make a living, and if they see the market going a certain way, some of our artists have moved in that way, and that's not to sort of like be like flippant about it, but it just is a fact, often, I did a Tyler Mitchell show in London at the gallery recently, and I collect, reach out to say collectors, and they would say, well, I don't collect photography. But in the other breath, like when they want a painting, they're like, I have one of the great collections of the 21st century, and I'm like, not if you don't collect photography, like it's a part of the, it's a part of the history of art, and it needs better, and that's why I love people like Carrie Mae Weems, who's just like stuck with it, like who is for so long undervalued, and but was called to this medium and continue to sort of make images, continue to sort of value it, and then there's other artists who and who've turned to painting after being in photography for a very long time, or using photography in a conceptual way, and so like I think both of those things happen. But I taught at Yale Photo this past semester, because I wanted to make sure that it was a graduate course, and the students will be graduating into the art world, and I wanted to make sure they knew that photo matters, it is so super important. But and then there's photographers who refuses to just show, because of the devaluing of photo, refuses to show in photo particular contexts, right? And so they only will show their photos at museums that do other things, right? And so, which I think is also like not great, but so like I think it's super complicated. But for me, it was about just like doing shows that and like in my gallery work, doing shows that were not just painting or I mean, I don't even think I've done a figurative. Or I guess Psy show that just opened on Thursdays, a figurative show, but they're landscapes. But like sort of the black body in that way, because it's so loaded, particularly when it comes to painting.
Yeah. And you mentioned your graduate course at Yale, super jealous, wish I could have enrolled. But it also was your return to the classroom. You work now at a formidable art gallery as a director. You are a curator, you're arts writer, fashion writer, but you started in education. You started as a kindergarten teacher, which is amazing element of your story and your trajectory here. And so in thinking about the New Black Vanguard, but perhaps you could even talk a little bit more about Yale, the New Black Vanguard, of course, serves this purpose of both merging photography and fashion. It creates this conversation around emerging photographers, both who have gone to school, who are formally trained, who are self-taught, and who are from a variety of locales. But in what ways is the New Black Vanguard, both the exhibition and the book, do you see it kind of being this educational tool as well?
Yeah, I mean, when I finished, I went to Georgetown in D.C. and studied politics there. I was like Hillary Clinton's intern. I had a wild sort of thing, but I was like Hillary Clinton's intern. I interned at the White House. I mean, it was like, all of that stuff. And I thought I was going to go into politics and did not like living in D.C. and nor did I like the people that I was encountering there. Surprise, surprise. And so I moved to New York and I needed to sort of do something. And for me, I never really sort of had the like being from where I'm from in Chicago, Cabrini Green, the housing projects that are no longer there. It was like I got out, whatever, like, that sort of story. Like, people had made sacrifices for me to sort of do what I, get where I was. And I was like, well, the thing that I could probably do is for the first several years of leaving school instead of like, going and, taking an investment banking job or whatever all my friends, were doing, I can give back in this way. And at the time, and it's sort of naive, I mean, I must say, like Teach for America was a thing. And I was like, well, I'll just do that. And had never thought about teaching in that way. And I do think if you're going to teach kids, you should want to be a teacher. I have to say that.
And you were with the little ones.
Yeah. And I was like, well, if I taught history, right? I was really sort of interested in teaching like high school history.
Oh, wow.
And they were like, no, you'll teach kindergarten, which was like fine. I taught at a charter school, didn't know what that was until I sort of got there. And obviously, like when you're 21 and school had changed so dramatically since like I was sort of in school in that way, like in sort of elementary school or as we say in Chicago, grammar school. And I was like, wait, and 5-year-olds are reading? Like, like it was just like not I had, I don't have kids or anything, so I was just like, wait, I wasn't reading enough. I took naps half the day, and so that was sort of it. And then they were like testing kids because education, was like right when I came out of school, 2011, we were having this huge debate about sort of how you educate kids, and they were trying all of this stuff basically on Black and brown kids in these charter schools and like all of these different philosophies, right? Like in terms of like, grit and this and that, all of these sort of new age sort of educator around the Teach for America sort of movement. We're doing this stuff. And I don't think it was, I must say, I don't think that is a way to sort of educate kids. I also don't think that you put a 21-year-old who never thought about teaching into a classroom to figure it out with, a bunch of kids who are counting on you who are 5 or whoever, whatever the age. I think it's so unfair to, Black kids. And, I got there and did not know what I was doing, but I was like, but I knew I knew how to. I was like, I was sort of like, they like gave me all these like choices. I was like, how about I just teach all the kids how to read, right? Like I will be the reading teacher. And because I was like, I think I can. I was like, I can figure out how to teach kids one thing, and I was like, let's sort of figure out how to teach them how to read, because I thought math at that age is sort of like you're memorizing, right? And so if you teach a kid how to read, you can teach them how to think. And so I was the kindergarten reading teacher for 4 years, and while I was doing that, I was also writing. And so by day, I was teaching kids 5-year-olds, and then by night, I was writing art criticism. And I did it for 4 years. And Teach for America is a 2-year commitment. All the teachers that I started, with the exception of one, quit within the first 6 months. It was bad, you know, and you sort of feel like obligated to those students, you know, and into your community. I mean, these are Black kids, you know, like, but having done that, I think I was attracted to sort of art world or the art artists because, you know, like you talk to an artist, they have everything figured out. You know, they have like ideas around everything, you know, political ideas, cultural ideas. And I was just sort of fascinated by, like, you know, this sort of space in which they sort of made objects, but they were also dreaming, you know, through this lifetime in a lot of ways. And so I was sort of really interested in that. And I thought that less so sort of an educational sense, but I thought that, like, you know, if I was just going to interview and write about the artists that I thought had some of the more interesting ideas, you know, and then maybe people can also, you know, think about those ideas. And so I think the New Black Vanguard is also that, right? It's an opportunity to sort of think through, you know, photography and the importance of photography, or how you encounter these images, because no one is encountering them. You're not having, even if it feels like you're having a passive sort of experience with sort of images, like they sort of order everything we do. And I wanted to sort of have that conversation about the ways that these photographers were actively trying to construct new notions, you know, around beauty and desire, and sort of, and it was like within a debate, right? Because like in the community, there's a debate around these notions, and outside the community, there's a debate around these notions, and so just wanted to sort of widen the debate. And without sort of telling people what to think. I have no desire to really do that.
Oh, no. It's very informative the way you construct your essay, but also in the presentation of the show. And even in your mention of your experience as a teacher, it just made me think of you sharing that anecdote with us yesterday during your keynote, the conversation you had with AWOL, and how he was just like, you know, Black kids will be able to come and see these images on the wall and not only see perhaps themselves, but also see kind of this diversity of right. Blackness that exists across space, that exists across time, and these images that are being created right now. And so the hope is, right, that, you know, a kid can pick up their iPhone or maybe their parents' iPhone or iPad or something, and take their own images and create their own world. And so I also see that as a possibility and capacity of this project as both informative and educational.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if kids are driven to do that, you know, it's all like, it's good by me, you know, like I think that I just wanted to make sure that, like, in a, you know, like, I don't think all art is educational, you know, like in sort of not to sort of throw a wrench in sort of conversation, but I don't think it's all educational, you know, and I think that it can be, you know, but I do think that it really is about sort of having an experience, you know, with it. And, you know, as we know, like, our different sort of, it's almost like abstract how, like, you encounter your relationship to these things are sort of abstract, you know, like you might have a feeling, but you can't describe sort of why or why you're drawn to one particular image versus another. And so it was about sort of opening the space to that, you know, sort of like an experience, and having, you know, a conversation about sort of what it means to be represented. And because all these images don't necessarily represent all Black people, right? And so, like, I think that, like, that's also a part of it. Like when someone is saying, what is it? What does that mean? Like what? And is it possible? Like, and so it's like those questions I'm sort of interested in. And then also just like, yes, like there are not enough exhibitions by Black artists. The museums are not collecting enough art by Black artists. Like all of those things. And so that was also sort of part of the mission. And so like when we went to institutions that were collecting institutions, I said, okay, you gotta leave here with something, like it would, like Denzel, like you need to buy something. Yeah. I don't care what you buy, but you're buying something, or else I'm not showing there. And so that was also part of it, right? Like it was like you don't get to just like put these, images on the wall and then, because some of these, institutions' histories around sort of Black artistic production in Black cities, right? Like are just, dismal. And so for me, it was also be like, okay, let's have the full conversation about what you do and not like, isn't it so great we put the show on, like that's which is a sort of not necessarily a place like Moad, but like like some of the sort of more these sort of other institutions that have histories of not honoring the creativity and the artistic breakthroughs of Black people, and so I was like, these are cheap images and you can add a few to your collection, and so that was also a part of it for me. It was like not just like the show goes down and then the show goes away, but like you should have a long running, institutionally, you should have a long running engagement with the material. And if the material's in your collection, there's more of a possibility for that to happen. So yeah, I think there's like a lot of sort of layers, in which you have to or at least I operate in the art world, because there's so many ways that inequality shows itself around sort of Black, artists, and like the type of galleries that, we get to show in a museum and so on and so forth. And so you have to sort of, when you're engaging these institutions, just like these are the sort of stipulations of showing this show. And a lot of them have stepped up. I mean, like even, it's like the show was at Detroit Institute of Art last year. Which is obviously in a historically Black city. It's an institution that does not have a historically great record with showing Black artists. And that was a part of the conversation, and what they did was really sort of great, where they sort of not only they didn't stop at, they own Wall's work now and they own Tyler Mitchell's work. And then they went to local photographers in their community that were, working in the community, and they put them in the show and they bought all the work from those 7 photographers, right? And, like that is sort of like, at the end of the day, you're in a community, right? Like you're in a local community. And so you should be, at the very least, engaging the artists in that community, in some way. And so it's been sort of it's about it's in some ways about the education piece. Some ways it's about the ways in which we sort of encounter images, and draw connections, personal connections to those images. But then it was also this idea of like, if we're going to do this and it's going to travel in all these places, want this show, then we're going to have to have some conversations about your institutional racism, and we're going to have some conversations about like how we're going to sort of try to fix that in relationship to this one show, but I hope that you continue on, and so that was, so I was trying to sort of do multiple things with the show, because even when you think about sort of the value of what Black photographers do get valued, and it's like, it's not fashion photography, right? And so like, I was also saying that like, it was significant that this many image makers from around the world who did not know each other, who of sort of a diaspora are making images like this. Isn't it significant to me? Like any other, if white people were doing this, you'll call it a movement, an art movement. So like, let's do the same thing here. And that was sort of my way of being like, not necessarily like, like putting my thumb on the scale for fashion photography. I think it exists like every other type of photography. I don't sort of have one, I don't lean one way or the other in that regard, but for me, it was the gesture of these group of artists working around the world in this way, deserving merit because it
was ushering in something new. And if you are sort of thinking art historically, you should be sort of thinking about that as a movement, right? And so it was just a way to, additional way to sort of, say that like these are serious, this is a serious movement in art and you need to sort of seriously engage it.
Well, Antwaun, I think you've accomplished what you've set out to do, I hope, through the new Black Vanguard. You've inspired many, I know, including myself, through not only this exhibition and this book, but also just in your malleability and your various career pivots. And my final question before we open it up to the audience is what advice would you give someone who perhaps is interested in pursuing a career in the creative industries, or perhaps is in a career right now that they don't think is a creative industry and want to make a pivot, but they don't see how those skills are transferable, et cetera? What kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my sort of simple advice is you got to find a way to do what you want to do. Like the work is what you should be after. Like I think I have like 9 jobs at this point. I don't really know. Maybe not that many jobs. Maybe you want to like take a vacation, but yeah, like I mean, I did, like there was no like I studied politics. Like I didn't study art. I mean, I went to museums and stuff as a kid, but I had a casual relationship to art. And then in my, and after I sort of moved to New York and fell in with, a group of friends, artists, and a lot of, it was also a really great time to be in New York, like before people started sort of fanning out, like the first, I think person I ever interviewed was Rashad Newsom, who now lives here, who's a dear friend of mine. And like, he was patient with me, like it wasn't like I rolled in and like knew, like what it meant to interview an artist, And so I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was a long time ago now, but I think it happened over like, I interviewed him. And then I was like, oh shit, I need to ask more questions. And then I asked more questions. And then I was like, okay, I need to ask more. Like it was really sort of, so I say that to say that like, you don't need to have all the answers. You need to have like a willingness to do the work and like whatever that is. And then the other thing is like, I said this to the kids, or not the kids, but basically my age, but the students at Yale, that like, because they asked me to organize, because they do a show, an exhibition after their thesis. They do a thesis exhibition, and they do it in the city at a gallery. And I said, okay, well, what gallery? They were like, would you organize the show for us? And I was like, well, what gallery would you want to show this work at? And they gave me a list of galleries, and and it was like the usual suspects. And I said to them, what you should be trying to do as a young artist emerging, or young person sort of going into a field, is you should be networking across. So the galleries that you should be looking at are ones that are just starting, people who are your age and who are out here who have something to prove. Because I go, I can show you this work. I can give you one of our galleries, and what does that do for you? Like in the sense of like you might get the sort of name brand, but you're not. No one's going like this work is. Like in the sense of like you need someone to sort of. You need. And that's what I did. It's like all of my friends that I sort of came up with in New York, like they were nobodies. When we were sort of coming up, and and that was fine because we all had dreams and goals, and we all listened to each other ideas, and like that was sort of the thing. It's like, and so find people that you can be in together with, not people who like have done the thing that you want to do, and then yes, like those people are important, but the people that are most important are the people who are trying to do the thing with you, and that's how you sort of create people that sort of will listen to your ideas, read, your shitty essays, and, like, et cetera, all of that stuff, because it's not going to be good right off the bat, right? And you have to sort of just have a commitment to doing the work and improving the work, like I read back some of the stuff that I've written and I'm like, oh I can't believe this was published, and so you have to have an openness around it, and you have to sort of like, it's not sort of just like for me, it's not like the end point isn't sort of any source of praise. The end point is the work, right? And so, like, even with, like, you know, some of the artists in the exhibition, it's like continuing to figure out ways to work together, right? Like, it's not just like this is like, yes, like we can say this by sort of all, and you know, metrics, this has been a very successful exhibition. But I go, well, but now these artists like 28, 29. What's next? Like, what else can we work on? What else can we do? You know, and so, you know, me and AWOL did a show, and then me and Tyler did a show, and then, you know, this coming week, you know, Daniel and AWOL are in this project that I'm, you know, launching, and so, you know, like, it's about continuing to sort of, you know, work or like, yeah, and so it's about networking across and being committed to the work that you want to do.
Wise advice from Antwaun Sargent. Thank you so much. We'll open it up to questions from the audience. I think we have time for maybe one or two.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi.
My name is Jasmine, and I wanted to touch back on the point that you were talking about institutions basically not buying enough Black art and not showing enough Black art. And among the Vanguard show, you're ushering in these new photographers and just making a point to showcase them. But where do you fall in this space? Like, as a curator, as an author, how do you usher in a new vanguard of people that want to work in the industry and get into these institutions so the institutional racism is basically checked there? It's checked at the door rather than you having to say, like, just buy art. So what do you have advice for people like that are just not necessarily artists but want to work within the industry?
Like as a writer or a curator or cultural worker, sort of? Yeah,
Both.
I mean, I think like there are a lot of different ways to be, you know, effective, I think, in, you know, museums or magazines or, and, you know, these are, you know, it's like, I always, like, sometimes I'm like, these aren't easy jobs. Like, I think the sort of navigating, you know, that has to happen, be ready for that, you know, and like, and they're hierarchical, the jobs, right? And so, like, that's why I never really, I mean, the gallery job that I have is the first job I've held in the art world, which is, you know, sort of like hilarious, you know, like in a way, because I wasn't interested in like that sort of work, you know, of like navigating some museum, some sort of like, you know, like outmoded museum structure, or I wasn't willing to like, or some magazine or, you know, what have you. I was sort of less interested in like someone telling me like my value, you know, than like showing, like, than being like, I know what the value is, I know what I can do, you know, and that took long, you know, I don't know if it took longer, but like, I think I was open to whatever the journey was, you know, whether it was going to lead to the stage or not. I was sort of fine with it, you know, because I just felt like I was super interested in work. And then, you know, again, like, it's about sort of like figuring out like how you need to be in the world, you know, like some people can't be a freelance, you know, basically cultural worker for 10 plus years, you know, like that's just like impossible for some people that, you know, but for me, it just allowed the most flexibility and allowed me to sort of think about, to even do shows like this, right? Like if I was at an institution and I said, oh, I want to do a show of fashion photographers no one ever heard of, that would have been, you know, like very few places would have been like, yeah, let's do that. You know, like I think that like there are, you know, real sort of trade-offs to sort of the different sort of, you know, you might be giving up, you know, for stability, you might be giving up, you know, creativity, you know, and for a lack of stability, you might be sort of, you know, being able to be the most creative that you possibly can, you know, and so I you know, I don't have like these institutions are rough, like I can't, you know, like I can't sort of sit here and say like this is how you do it because I didn't do it, you know, but what I did have is like a belief and sort of art and artist and sort of being able to work with those art and artists, you know, like and yeah, like that was sort of thing that drove me. And then I was like,
and for a long, it's like a long time, was really like making no money, but I grew up poor, so I didn't really, like I didn't have any money, so like it wasn't really sort of a thing that I was sort of necessarily concerned with. Like I was just like, well, this is cool, like like that was sort of what drove me, like and then I was like, because even when I was offered the gallery job, I didn't apply. I haven't applied for. I mean, I've just never applied for a job in that way. And when I was offered this gallery job, or like these curator, like Aperture came to me and said, "Do you want to do a book?" Like I don't know. I don't know if I would have been able to like apply for those things, right? And I think that's a critique of the system, But like I don't think I would like. I don't like. It's like I was called and was like, "Hey, do you want to work at the gallery?" Chris Booth, who used to be the executive director of Aperture, called me randomly and was like, "Hey, we have a spot in our." Basically Tyler Mitchell was offered. The way that I understand the story, Tyler Mitchell was offered the slot that this book eventually became an Aperture. Publishing schedule. Tyler didn't want the slot, and then so they called me. Like that. Like that was sort of. So had Tyler wanted the slot, you would not have this book, right? Or the exhibition, or this this show that has been very critical to the continuation of Aperture, right? Like I think that like that's what's super sort of like interesting about sort of life, right? Like the way in which like these things sort of happen, but I swear to God, I could not give you advice on like how to sort of navigate those things, because I was not interested or willing, and then things just sort of started to happen, and very often it doesn't happen for most folks, right? And so like I don't really know, I don't have an answer for you, other than like. But once you start doing things, like they do build on, like each other, right? Like, and so having this opportunity to do this first book, then led to other, opportunities as well. And so I would just sort of take the opportunities as they come and just do the work that you can do in those moments, really. And if you need to be at an institution, then yeah, like, I would sort of apply, for those jobs, and then like, like, buckle in.
We have time for more because we have to get Antwaun off to the airport very shortly.
Maybe a few more.
A few more?
It's only one.
Okay, a few more.
30 minutes away, right? The airport.
30. It's Sunday, I think. Oh, they said no. Okay, maybe two more. Sorry.
More
Go
than,
ahead.
okay, sorry. Thank you. I will be like. I thought it was like 20 minutes away, but okay.
This is more of a thank you for being here and doing all that you've done for MOAD, and for this wonderful, fresh conversation. It's very revealing for everybody. And I just want to say, since we're talking about photography, I hope people look at the blow-up of the photograph by Chester Higgins that's on the front of the building, if you don't know about that. If you haven't seen it from across the street, go across and see the full range. It's absolutely gorgeous, the mosaic that's been there since we opened.
I just wanted to thank the museum. I don't really, they took the show, and Moneta and the team really sort of put it on and has made it really like a real destination. Like I get all the press updates, like link or the, when the new Black Vanguard is sort of, Google alerts. Sorry, my assistant set this up for me, not I. And just like reading the stuff that has been written, and it's really that's a sort of Moneta and team and a sort of effort that does not just happen. And so I just want to say thank you, and thanks for having me, and it's so good to see you. That was 2018. I was like sitting there like, oh my God, yeah.
One more question. I think we have a hand in the back.
Hello. My question is about what you mentioned about being able to navigate and push certain ideas in terms of like the show and representation. It was a little easier to do that not being within an institution, and how the roles are kind of hierarchical. So I'm curious now that you are navigating a space, an institution, are you able to still push forward ideas of representation now that you're operating within an institution, or has that changed? Did you feel like you had more freedom when you weren't an institution?
No, I mean, I made very clear when I was negotiating the contract that I have at the gallery, I made very clear that like I will do whatever I want outside of this place. And, you know, like, because, you know, it's like one of those things, you do so much work and then you sort of go and you work, you know, for an institution. And you don't want to, I mean, at least I wasn't willing to, I mean, I think it's a error if you're a person like I am, which is someone who is interested in Black artistic production in a sort of expansive way and not necessarily like just in one sort of lane, right? So like selling art is one thing, you know, like, and it's necessary, and it's all of it, there's a lot of reasons why it's necessary, and there's a lot of reasons why Black artists need to be this particular type of gallery. And so that's necessary, but it's not the only thing that I do. And so I was really adamant about like, I'm willing to work here, but like, I'm only willing to work, like, you know what I mean? I'm not this place, you know, like, and I think that like, you know, we just need to be a lot more sort of conscious, like, because I've just, you know, like, I just seen so many people that like get a new job, you know, Black people get a new job, and, you know, it's like heralded as like this thing, and, you know, whatever, and people, in 2 months, they're out, you know, and it's not, it's because like those institutions are inflexible, really. Like inviting someone in, and it's like, you know, you have to sort of adapt to the person that is sort of, you know, is being invited in. And so for me, it's definitely work. Like I'm definitely navigating in a lot of different ways, because before I was basically like a one-man band, you know, like, and so like I didn't have like people that, and I didn't have like bosses I needed to manage, or, you know, colleagues that needed, you know, I didn't have any of that. And so it was a different sort of politics, you know, like, and that was that's interesting, sort of it's an interesting thing to sort of navigate. But then, you know, like I do all the sort of things that I want to do outside the gallery, and, you know, shows and advise, you know, like fashion brands, and I do all of that stuff. I still do I do literally every, I don't know, we'll see, like, if my energy ever, you know, drops, I probably would not be doing that, but it's sort of nice to like have like, be able to do both of those things, and be able to you know, still, even within the institution, determine what I want, like what I would want to do. And I also think like past jobs that I was offered, I didn't take them because it was like a little bit more restricting, and less sort of like them willing to sort of meet me on my terms. And, you know, because like when I got the job, a lot of people were like, so you're not going to write anymore, you know? And I was like, no, I'll keep writing, you know, like, because that was an important part of like who I am, you know? It's not even about like, you know, and I write about like competing, you know, competitor artist or whatever, you know, like I just don't really sort of see it. I just see it like I'm interested in Black artistic production. There are a lot of different ways that you need to make you need to sort of make the system work. And I'm trying to sort of, as my interests are have aligned, I try to make sure that I am doing all of those things. And so like, you know, artists, you know, it's show in museums, they need to show in galleries. They just can't show in galleries, they need to show in museums. They can't just, you know what I mean? Like they need to make books and stuff. And so, you know, like and then I still do exhibitions. I have an exhibition at, I'm co-curating the exhibition at the Frick Museum in New York of Barclay Hendricks' work that opens in September. I'm making another book, right? I'm making a book for that. Yeah, like I think it's about like, just making sure like when you are getting these jobs, you're sort of like navigating that to what you need the work to be, right? And that if you've been someone that's been working a long time, then the work needs to become a part of the work that you've been doing, or else like, I don't think it's going to work.
And your exhibitions at the gallery, right, still speak to your goal to champion Black artists. So your social works exhibition.
I am someone who have, you know, for the last decade now, like been very interested in Black artistic production. I could have also been someone who was like very interested in like, I don't know, Renaissance painting, right? But like, this is what I'm interested in. And like, just because I'm at the gallery doesn't change what I do. So I do shows with Black artists because that's what I'm interested in, you know? And if those interests sort of grow and evolve or expand in some different way, I will happily sort of do that work too. But, you know, at the moment, I think that we're still in a moment where even that, like, calling it a moment, like, it really, makes it seem like there's going to be failure or something. And so I'm just, like, interested in doing the work so that, there are maybe some more options for folks.
Well, to the work. Thank you so much, Antwaun. Thank you again for joining us this Sunday afternoon. It truly was a pleasure to be here with Antwaun, but to also be here with you.